Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And please, if it's okay with you, please permit me to allow me to continue on with our discussions of this great series from Steve McQueen, which is Small Axe. And these discussions are set forth against the backdrop or in the context or relating to this release by the Criterion Collection in this year, 2023, of this multi-disc Blu-ray set, which is Small Axe, 5 films by Steve McQueen. And as some of you may know, we have been going through a discussion of each of the works. And that brings us today to a film, again from 2020. Small Axe is a series from 2020 made up of a number of films, one of which is, or the final film being work which is directed by Steve McQueen and story by Steve McQueen with screenplay credited to Alistair Siddons and Steve McQueen and starring Kenya, Sandy, and Charlene White and others. It is a very compelling work, and it is called Education. Education. So it's part of the series. So once again, if you open up the series and pull out one of the sleeves, which is the Small Axe Devoted sleeve, and you open this up here, we have 2 discs. The second disc is the one that is below in this layering system, and you can find the option to select education, the work education, and if you select that, that'll take you to the film itself. And my goodness, this is another very compelling, very powerful and heartfelt work, which is focusing in on the education system as it affects this particular young boy and his family. And it also touches upon a lot of things in terms of institutional education systems and how there may be prejudicial or as is recognized or as is discussed in this film, elements of racial prejudice that are part of sort of systemic attitudes that have real and quite dire effects on the people and the families against whom these attitudes are present. And we see how families are trying to cope with this, how this affects the sort of psyche and the confidence levels of the children, and how this is a very big and fundamental thing in terms of confidence and self-confidence, and also type of worth and self-worth, and the levels and degrees where this is changed or altered depending on quote-unquote one's status within the education system. And the status in question is of the young boy Kingsley Smith, who one day is determined through some kind of standardized test to perhaps be fitting more according to the standards applied by the system. He is deemed to be sort of moved to a different school. And the quote that's used in certain places is, I use the quote here, educationally subnormal, end quote. And this is therefore the story of Kingsley being moved to a different school where the attention or lack of attention is part of the issue, and also where his own, say, concept of worth and self-worth are also in danger. Also, we see how his family seem to be coping. First, there is not any type of clear guidance or clear explanation as to why this decision was made, how it was made, and to what extent this has a drastic effect on Kingsley and his family. So part of the story is the family learning about this through a certain set of, say, obstacles that are present there, again, as part of maybe systemic problem or systemic problems that are identified throughout this work. Now, once the problem is identified, then the issue becomes how to deal with it, how to cope with the situation. And so, because one of the one of the issues with Kingsley is the fact that his new school is one where perhaps his degree or level of education is not sufficient, and because of the lack of sufficiency in the education levels, that is really heavy toll on himself, especially considering this age, a very, very important age in terms of growth and development, where if you have this type of fundamental change that happens, type of adverse effect, that can have serious ramifications going forward, and taking into consideration that these being the fundamental building blocks for someone who will grow up and be part of society. Well, if those building blocks are affected at this stage, then that will affect this person's sense of worth and sense of attention, as well as how this person is treated in the system when this person enters into adulthood. So the stakes are incredibly high at this stage. And so Kingsley's life, in a manner speaking, as linked through education and his journey through the education system, as charted by this film, the stakes are very, very high indeed, such that his whole life could be potentially affected. And we get a sense of this. And when his family gets a sense of this, we also see how his family is trying to cope. And maybe those feelings of self-worth or confidence, or maybe lack of confidence, due perhaps to a type of a long-term being subjected to a long-term racial and prejudicial attitudes from external forces. Maybe that is also seen to have a type of generational toll on the family's ability or inability to cope or handle the situation. But in that, or amongst that, we do see emerging changing or shifting attitudes on the part of the family in particular. And this brings into fore the mother, as portrayed by Charlene White. And we see her efforts at, first of all, recognizing the problem, which is itself a huge step. And once the problem is recognized, then how to cope with this problem, and to what extent is one going to avail oneself of the tools available within the system, versus what to do if those tools are deemed inadequate, and what other tools will be at one's disposal in order to effect change, or hopefully effect change. And here's where we get some other aspects of the story involving community outreach, that the family is not alone in recognizing this real issue of educational standards or substandards that are affecting, it's in particular that are affecting immigrant population and immigrant families, West Indian immigrant families of London. And so there is this prejudicial attitude, and it brings also into question attitudes and outlooks and perspectives on race, and also pronunciation and language inflection, and how that itself may bring with it, at least for certain people, that might bring with it elements of racially charged prejudicial attitudes, which in and of itself, I think, brings into question, this idea of perception, and this idea of, are racial or prejudicial attitudes linked to this idea of elements of how language is perceived. I mean, those questions and other questions are part of the discussion points of this really fascinating and compelling work, Education, as well as ways forward and possible solutions. And herein lies, again, another really fundamentally admirable and very uplifting aspect of education, and also other aspects of small acts as well. Again, we'll talk about the significance of the title Small Acts when we get to the wrap-up video discussion. But one of the great inspiring and very uplifting aspects of this work, Education, is the way in which this film is also addressing solutions or possible solutions. Those solutions are not necessarily quick fix solutions, and those solutions are not necessarily easy solutions, but there are solutions being discussed. And those solutions seem to have to do with a sense of self-worth, and a sense of recognizing a degree of confidence, And that idea of self-worth and confidence is in many ways a type of mindset. Therefore, the changes, while there are systemic changes or changes that are required in order to effect change on a type of institutional level, on a type of political level, the idea of change, the idea of transformation is also psychological. And this is a powerful concept, which is the idea that in order to be able to effect change on the macro level, change also needs to occur on the micro level. In other words, minds need to be changed, outlooks need to be changed, viewpoints need to be changed. And I think that concept is shining through these works of Small Axe, in particular education, by the very fact that we are getting this story through the prism of the experiences of this family, the Smith family. So in that way, this work is so compelling and so dramatically engaging that it makes for very emotionally arresting work indeed. And some of the solutions that are had or discussed, as I say, they're not always easy solutions, and they might not necessarily be solutions that are immediately feasible. But it always comes down to the idea of perception and worth and confidence, and how that is almost a subjective or individual mindset, but minds being changed. This is a seemingly fundamental thing. It is also so hugely important, because once mindsets can be changed, then the next steps can be possible. And so that type of approach, I think, is very much inherent in a work like education. It shows and displays issues and problems of a systemic level. It shows them in a way through the prism of the intimate family dynamic, which I think is a very powerful way of showing this indeed. So we have a storyline that is using not necessarily real-life events, historical record events, like, say, we saw in Mangrove or Alex Weedle or Red, White, and Blue, excuse me, but rather we see a type of sensibilities and attitudes and environmental currencies that are part of, in particular, the West Indian immigrant experience life, as tied to life in urban areas of the city center of London, and also how certain families are affected, such as the Smith family, in the context of, in this case, the context of education, although there are other aspects that appear as well. So here, therefore, we have similarities and differences, and maybe much like the work Lover's Rock, we have a dramatized version, relying on a dramatized version to provide the backdrop for points of discussion that can be had that are, again, very relevant and related to similar socio-political and cultural themes that we saw emerging in the other episodes of Small Axe. So in that way, it is similar yet different, and it's similar, but it also stands on its own in terms of its own entity, its own spirit, its own living, breathing liveliness that I think is really in keeping with Small Axe overall. This is incredibly powerful. This is incredibly powerful, and there is a type of optimism that is so defiant, flying in the face of the harshest of obstacles, and those obstacles seem all the harsher by virtue of the fact that children are being affected, the education system. Children are being affected, and again, at a very crucial and critical age. So this high stakes is really quite palpable and felt very strongly and very directly. And in the hands of Steve McQueen and others, this is so masterfully captured in this dramatization. So what a work this is, education. I am thoroughly impressed with this. And again, much like the other works in Small Axe, the performances are top-notch. Charlene White as Mrs. Smith, this mother who is working so hard, and how those aspects of sort of economic, say, for lack of a better phrase, or economic hardships, how those might be seen also to be obstacles in the way of permitting her and people similarly situated in her position to fully understand and fully appreciate the problems that their children are facing. But once she is able to overcome such obstacles, then the idea of the small acts or the change, and those changes happen on an immediate individual level. When minds can be changed, it seems like the next steps are possible. So that is a really powerful set of circumstances that are shown through in these great performances. So and the like. So kudos, bravo to Steve McQueen and to the cast and crew of Education for again presenting another. Wow, what a rich and very compelling work indeed. This is the work which is Education. So, like the other films, Small Acts, of course, is included as part of this Criterion release, this multi-disc Blu-ray set. Small Acts, 5 films by Steve McQueen. And as I mentioned earlier, it can be found as an option to view on Disc 2 of the Small Acts section of this, essentially this box set. And so with respect to the masters, I should point to the note that's part of the booklet, the great booklet. With regard to Education, it says, the 5 films of Small Acts are presented in their original aspect ratios. Education in 1.60 to 1. Approved by director Steve McQueen, these new digital masters were created in 2K resolution from the Super 16mm original camera negative for Education. The original 5.1 surround soundtracks were remastered from the digital audio master files. So, very interesting. Super 16 materials that were used as the basis for this. So, I think that, again, much like my comments from the other discussions, I think the differences are not so vast in terms of the way in which digital video is used versus the way that 35mm is used, and indeed versus how Super 16 is used. So I think the differences aren't vast, but I think they're subtle. But they are there, and they are detectable, and I think in a really great way. So for instance, Super 16, I think one of the great comments that was made in the great essay, the comprehensive essay as part of the booklet, and we'll talk about that again in a separate video, is that the Super 16 usage here in the context of Education is very reminiscent of something like the BBC Play for Today drama setting. Almost this kind of, in sometimes some aspects, this handheld, almost urgent quality to it. And I think that sense of visual urgency is very much mirroring the sense of a type of social or political urgency that is required for once the issue and the problem that's at the very heart of education is recognized. So this idea of a social urgency that maybe is parallel to a type of visual urgency that is, I think, suggestive inherently in the Super 16mm usage. So I think that is the general sense. And I would subscribe to that reading 100%. I think there is a way in which this type of this drama does harken back to that sense of maybe I don't want to say social realism, but a sense of programs that had inherent with it the idea of using drama as the basis for addressing issues in order to endeavor to maybe strive towards what ultimately could be this notion of social change. So in that way, in education, in terms of its content and its story ideals, I think, is very much in line with that, hand in glove. So very, very, very fascinating usage. And again, I think in terms of healthy speculation, because I don't know exactly Again, I'm not privy to that information about, and I'll talk a little bit again about that in terms of the supplements discussion in the later video, but I think it's very healthy to speculate that kind of cinematic approach to this. And in that way, education in terms of its look and feel and aesthetic is utterly brilliant. Utterly, utterly brilliant. And then let's continue on with the supplements. So once again, like with the other small axe films, education has included with it its own set of supplements. On paper, it does seem to be somewhat low in quantity, in number, but what are they in terms of substance or quality? So first up, we have another behind the scenes. This is approximately 5 minutes. However, I should point out the following. The other behind the scenes appear to be behind the scenes that weren't produced directly by the Criterion Collection. However, in this instance, for education, the behind the scenes seem to be Criterion produced or arranged. They are credited at 2023. The total is 5 minutes. And so we have, again, very similarly akin to what we saw before in the other behind the scenes, excerpts or interviews with a number of the key players of the cast and crew, such as Tracy Scofield and Steve McQueen, and also Charlene White, etc. Again, speaking to the currency and the urgency and the emotional depth and the intimate importance of this work education, as well as other aspects. So the behind the scenes, it is brief. Again, 5 minutes is, relatively speaking, quite brief indeed, but well worth it. Well worth it indeed. And so that's the behind the scenes from 2023. And then the supplements are rounded out by another trailer. So once again, I am left wanting more in terms of supplemental material. It would have been really great to have, much like my feelings for the other films, small axe films and the supplements. It would have been great to have other supplements a part of this. Maybe more discussions about maybe specific education, specific aspects of the actors, or maybe aspects of I don't know, BBC Play for Today, I'm not sure, or commentary tracks, or what. It would have been great to have had more of those, because I was so overwhelmed by the power of the film education that I was left wanting more. And I got a little bit of it from, say, this behind the scenes. You get a little bit of it in the supplement of the discussion with Steve McQueen that's included as part of the supplements for Mangrove. But I'm left also wanting more. So, again, a minor critique that we will address a little bit later in a separate video, but in terms of the number of supplements. But that being said, the work is really brilliant stuff indeed. So it's a very powerful, watching the behind the scenes is a very powerful reminder of just indeed how powerful the work is. That is education. And then let's conclude our discussion of this work education. Again, we will leave our comments with regard to the packaging and the cover art of this set overall. We will leave that for the next discussion, video discussion, as well as the booklet. But before we leave, let me point out that on pages 12 and 13 of the booklet, we do have sections here devoted to education. So we have a picture still, and then we have a little write-up, and then here on this side we have the cast and crew details. So on pages, again, 12 and 13 of this great booklet. We'll talk more about the booklet overall in a separate video, but just let you know about that. So, my dear friends, that is just some brief comments about the great work as part of Small Axe, the film being education. So please check it out if you haven't done so already. It is really so powerful indeed. So, my dear friends, thank you very much. And so what do you think? Please feel free to let me know in the comment section below. As always, I would love to hear what it is you have to say. But until the next video, my dear friends, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great movies. So until the next video, my dear friends, stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.